It's time for another Dice Tower review with Randy White and Mark Streed.
Hello folks, and welcome to Board Game Corner. I'm Mark.
And I'm Randy.
And this week we are reviewing an older game from 2007, Vikings from Rio Grande Games. It plays 2 to 4 players and about an hour to play.
Vikings is a game that involves a modular board, worker placement, and a clever mechanism of buying tiles and meeples from a spinning wheel, also called a rondelle. Now, Vikings has been out of print since 2007, but in fairly high demand. Many of you may have seen it on eBay or Amazon for $100 or more. You might be wondering why we're reviewing an older game that's so hard to find and so expensive even if you do find it. Well, the fact is, in spring of 2014, Z-Man Games is reprinting Vikings. Today, Mark and I are going to be reviewing it, and I'll give you a preview. Vikings is a good game, but the questions that remain are, how good of a game is it? Is it the right game for you? And what, if anything, does it have to do with Vikings? To find out the answer to these questions, let's head to the table. The game of Vikings is initially set up by giving each player his own playing frame in which to place his tiles. He is also given a starting tile, indicated by the Viking symbol on the back, which shows the left side of an island. He's given a card to indicate the details of the big scoring round and the final game end scoring round. He's given 2 tokens of the same color, one to place on the scoring track at the 0 position, and another to place at the top of his tile frame to indicate to other players which color he is. A set of coins, the value of which is dependent upon the number of players playing, and the start player is given the starting token. The board is initially set up by placing 6 stacks of 12 tiles in each of these positions. Now, Vikings is played in 6 rounds, and at the beginning of each round starts by taking the next stack in the sequence and placing the tiles around the board. Island tiles start being placed at the 0 position, and additional island tiles are placed in a clockwise manner. Ship tiles are initially placed at the 11 position, and additional ship tiles are placed in a counterclockwise position. After the tiles have been placed, 12 random Vikings are pulled from the bag. The Vikings are placed around the wheel as follows. Starting with the 0 position, any blue Vikings are placed. After the blue Vikings, in a clockwise position, yellow Vikings are placed, then green, then red, and black, and ultimately gray. And this sequence is shown here in case you forget. In each turn of Vikings, a player must purchase a combination of tile and Viking from one of the positions on the wheel for the cost shown on the wheel using the money he has. A player may not purchase from the 0 position unless the Viking there is the only one of his color on the board remaining. Once the player has purchased a tile and Viking combination for the money shown on the wheel, as in this case 1, he must play it within his frame. On the very first turn of the game, the player is given a starting tile, which shows the beginning of an island, and he must or can play that starting tile along with his first purchase tile as part of his move. Now we'll talk about legal positions for tiles and how Vikings are played in a moment. Once the 0 position becomes vacant on the wheel, the rondelle is advanced to the first non-vacant position. Now there is one exception to a person being able to buy the tile and Viking at the 0 position, even if there are other Vikings of that color still remaining. If the player cannot afford the next occupied position on the wheel, in this case 1, and the player would have to be broke, then that player can purchase the 0 position, but only then. And again, in this case, the wheel would advance. Please notice that when the wheel advances, it makes the cost of all the remaining tiles less expensive. Each player is given his own playing frame in which to place tiles. The frame shows 7 rows, including 6 color-coded occupations and a 7th row for boats. The occupations are blue fishermen, yellow goldsmiths, green scouts, red nobles, black warriors that defend against incoming ships, and lastly, gray boatmen.
There are 3 types of island tiles. There's left, center, and right. And these can be used to configure islands in multiple ways. We can do short islands, and we can do really long islands that can be played throughout the rows. And they can be stacked like so.
The 4th type of tile is the ship tile. The initial 3 ships purchased can be placed on the top row in any order. When a ship is placed, it threatens all the colonists below it, down to the row indicated by the color of the sail. In this case, it would threaten colonists all the way down to the row with the red nobles. When a colonist is threatened, he is basically deactivated and will score no points until a warrior is placed to defend him. In this case, the ship threatens all the colonists down to the green row, but none of them are deactivated because a black warrior is in place to defend against the incoming ship. So the question you may be asking is, how does this relate to the tile and Viking that I just purchased? When a player purchases a tile and Viking combination, he must place the tile in a legal position as dictated by the rules we just mentioned. If the player places the tile in a row that matches the color of his Viking that he just purchased, he has the option of leaving the Viking on that tile to score later. However, if the player purchases a tile and chooses to position it in a row that doesn't match the color of the Viking he just purchased, for example right here, he does not have the option of leaving the Viking on that tile. Instead, he must move it to the upper left-hand corner by the boatman to be ferried into position later if a boatman is available. Also, if a player positions a tile or is not able to play a tile at all, then the associated Viking is immediately positioned up here in the left-hand corner and the tile is discarded. There are 7 scoring phases in Vikings, 1 after each of the 6 rounds, and a 7th one at the very end of the game. After the odd-numbered rounds, the 1st, 3rd, and 5th, there are no victory points distributed. However, for each yellow Viking in the goldsmith row, the player is given 3 coins. In this case, the player will be given 6 coins for the 2 standing yellow Vikings. If a yellow Viking has been deactivated by an incoming ship, he is given no coins. After the even-numbered rounds, 2nd, 4th, and 6th, before scoring occurs, a player is given a chance to ferry any Vikings in the upper left-hand corner to the appropriate spaces. Ferryman can carry Vikings based upon the following rules. He can either carry 2 or all of one color Viking or 1 of each color Viking. In this case, the player can ferry 2 black warriors to these positions or these various colored Vikings to appropriate positions. Now he will choose the latter because that will grant him more points, and in this case he will use the boatman to ferry a fisherman to the blue row. There are no empty spots in the yellow row, so he cannot ferry the goldsmith. He'll ferry a scout to the green row and a warrior to the black row. Any Vikings that were previously deactivated because they were threatened by incoming ships but are now being defended by black warriors are reactivated for scoring. Scoring occurs as follows once all the ferrying has been done. And the boatman, once he has ferried Vikings, is discarded. If the player has additional boatmen, he can continue ferrying until he has no boatmen left. When it's time for scoring, scoring occurs as follows. Each red noble is worth 2 victory points. Each green scout is worth 1. Goldsmith and fishermen are not worth any victory points unless they are overseen by a scout. For this player, at this phase in the game, he would be given 1, 2, these count for nothing because they are not overseen by a scout, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Additionally, any ships that are being repelled by black warriors grant the player either victory points or coins as shown in the upper right-hand corner. In this case, the player also receives 8 coins because he has these 2 warriors defending these ships. In the 7th scoring phase, at the very end of the game, points are applied as follows. For each ship that is not being repelled by a black warrior, the player loses the number of victory points or coins that is shown in the upper right-hand corner. In this case, the player would lose 2 victory points. Next, for each 5 coins the player has, he is given 1 victory point. Players compare the number of remaining boatmen they have, and the player with the most remaining boatmen gets 10 victory points. Players compare the number of completed islands they have. In this case, the player has 1, 2, 3, and the player with the most completed islands gets 7 victory points. The player with the longest island gets 5 victory points. Any players tying for the most islands or the longest island share that number of victory points. They each get 7, or they would each get 5. The very last scoring mechanism involves the fishermen. Each of the fishermen could feed themselves as well as 4 other Vikings. The player calculates the number of fishermen he has, and in this case the player has 3, which means the player can feed an additional 12 Vikings. The player then counts the number of remaining Vikings he has, both active and inactive, as well as the Vikings in the upper left-hand corner. In this case, the player has 14. If the player has too few fish to feed his Vikings, he loses 1 victory point for each fish he is short. If he has too many, he gains an additional 2 victory points for each additional or each excess fish he has. In this case, the player has 12 additional fish, 14 Vikings to feed, so he would lose 2 victory points. After that, scores are compared, and the winner of the game is pronounced. Once you've played Vikings a few times in the basic mode, you might want to try the advanced rules. In the advanced version of Vikings, the ferryman can only ferry 1 Viking at a time. In this case, the player would have to choose between ferrying a red into the red row or a black into the black row. Additionally, these tiles with the dark green backs are used by first placing them into these 2 positions, and then at the beginning of each round, distributing 4 tiles into these 4 squares. Whenever a player purchases the most expensive item on the wheel, in this case 7, the player is also given an option to choose one of these 4 tiles. These tiles can impact the way scoring is done. So for example, in this case, if the player chose this red one, for each noble that he has standing, he would get 1 additional victory point. It may also impact the money he gets. In this case, if a player chose the yellow one, for each goldsmith he has standing, he would get 1 additional coin. For tiles like this, the player immediately gets 5 coins. And if a player receives a boat, it enables a boatman, 1 boatman, to act according to the basic rules by ferrying all Vikings of 1 color or 1 Viking of each color. And then after the Viking or the boatman has finished ferrying based on those rules, he and the boat are both discarded.
One of my favorite aspects of this game has to be the artwork and the components. The vibrant colors, the rondelle, really serve to pull you into the game. And then the components with the Viking meeples are amazing. It really serves well to bring people into the game.
Yeah, and I think that attractiveness of the game, the vibrant colors, as you mentioned, the palette, as well as the novelty of the little Viking meeples make it all something that people will see on a table and say, well, I want to give this a try. The tiles themselves have nice little, what appear to be Norse or Celtic designs on the back of them. And so that adds to a little bit of a flavor of the Viking culture, perhaps. One thing I didn't see on there was runes. That surprised me.
Yeah,
but
I do too.
It's an attractive game. My only reservations are the artwork is a little bit static. It has a vintage or woodcut feel, so you don't see Vikings in action.
Right.
You see them just standing there, doing things like goldsmithing and fishing and nobling or something like that. Yep. The other thing is the color of the playing pieces. Your little wooden blocks are fairly bland.
Yeah, they need a little help, but that doesn't detract from the game. No,
overall it's a very appealing game and will cause people to come to the table and want to give it a try. When I first saw a picture of the Vikings game board, I thought the rondelle was going to be a complete gimmick.
Oh, me too.
Just something to try to set it apart from the other games.
Yep.
But as I played it, I found it to be a fascinating mechanism for not only anticipating moves, but also forcing your opponents into certain choices because of that fact they cannot buy the item on the 0 block if there are other Vikings of the same color or unless they're broke.
Right.
So I found that to be a very interesting mechanic for the game.
I would agree. And I think that's the strongest part of the mechanics for the game. Because the rest of the game plays not a lot different than many games we played before. There's nothing groundbreaking here, but it's solid and it all works. It puts me in the mind of things like Carcassonne,
right.
Some Seven Wonders, as you were saying, for scoring and things. It keeps the game on like a solid foundation. Mechanics work. You move through. Everybody knows what they're doing. There's not a big mystery. I think the rondelle was the only thing that was like groundbreaking, so to say, right?
I'd agree with that. Yeah. The tile laying reminds me a bit of Alhambra.
Yeah,
where you're trying to make certain you get tiles and don't box yourself into a corner. For those of you who haven't played, you're trying to put walls against walls on little tiles and open spaces against open spaces, and you could easily find yourself in Vikings where you simply can't place a tile if you haven't been thinking ahead. But the scoring, as you mentioned, also reminds me of Seven Wonders, where there's early scoring rounds and there's a very late scoring round. If anything, I feel like the final scoring round in Vikings is far more powerful than even something like Seven Wonders.
Yeah, maybe a little too much.
Yeah, because you don't see it coming. In Seven Wonders, you can say, they've got these cards, and I kind of know where they're at.
What's happening.
But here, that final round can radically change the position of everybody on the board. No matter how well they've done in the early rounds, that final position or final scoring round can radically change things and make the loser the winner. We've seen somebody jump 30 points in the final round.
Huge swings.
Yeah. So those are things, I think, as we play it more, those are things we'll anticipate.
Yes.
But overall, the mechanism, the rondelle and the varied scoring rounds make it very interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And as Mark said, even though not everything is revolutionary, it's still a very solid game in terms of mechanics and rules.
Yeah. The other aspect of this game that I liked was the ease of learning. We brought our families in. They all caught on right away. There wasn't a lot of heavy lifting to get them to catch on, so to say.
Right.
And my youngest dominated and beat us all, right?
Yes, she did. I think that's fairly straightforward. The rondelle makes it easy to figure out what you have to spend to purchase a particular tile. Once people have figured out that they can not only set island pieces side by side, but also above and below existing pieces, it's fairly straightforward for them to play. That's a strength. It can also be a weakness. In some ways, the game plays itself if you're not investing yourself thinking ahead. I think it's a very easy game to learn to play, but it's a more difficult game to learn to play well.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
Because you're always trying to think those 4 moves ahead and then always foiled by the next person next to you.
And planning ahead for that final round is so important.
Yeah.
But it's easy to focus only on the immediate tactics, and that's why I say sometimes it can feel like it's playing itself. You're saying, well, I want to put another red guy next to my red line, instead of saying what I need to be doing is strategizing for how I'm going to score big in the final round.
Yes, exactly.
So ease of learning has been great, but I think that can be its downfall unless people really invest themselves for the long-term strategy.
I would agree.
Now, one of the other benefits of the game is that player uptime is fairly high. In some games, you have to wait a long time until it's your turn again, and in the meantime, you're just twiddling your thumbs. In this case, the turns are fairly quick. There aren't a lot of choices for what you're going to buy. There are certainly choices for where you're going to position your pieces and your Vikings, but the turns are fairly quick. It comes back around to your turn very soon.
Definitely.
So people remain engaged in the game.
Which I think also plays into playing the game well, because you're trying to plan ahead.
Yes, absolutely.
And those things just make it really fun, I think.
Yeah.
Replayability. So I think we played this game over and over and over, and even my kids asked, can we play again?
Yeah.
So I think that's a very strong aspect, is that everybody wanted to jump in. We have friends that frequently request it on game night.
We do.
So those things make the game, again, more enjoyable. All right, now let's talk about what I didn't like. All right,
Yeah.
So I am a big theme guy, right? And this is a Vikings game. I expected Vikings. Well, it could have just been people on islands. It didn't have any kind of... It didn't feel like the theme was not Vikings. I expected more from the name.
If game manufacturers were obligated to have truth in advertising, it would be called Occupation Segregated Island Colonies Occasionally Under Attack.
Exactly.
That would be the title of it. And especially in the fact that your little meeples represent Vikings, okay? And they are actually not on the offensive, they're on the defensive. They're minding their own business, they're creating little colonies, and the ships, which... don't know who the ships are supposed to be. According to the box, you'd think it were the Vikings, but according to Meeples, the Vikings are actually the victims. They're the ones being oppressed. So it's not what you would expect from a game. There is no pillaging involved in this game. There's no ransacking or burning no villages to the ground. Now, that's a terrible stereotype. I'm sure that in real life they were completely different. But it isn't what you'd expect when you buy Vikings. Nonetheless, if theme is not critical to you, you still might enjoy the game. And it's not nearly as important to me as it is to Mark.
Exactly. And it didn't destroy my enjoyment of the game. It's just that's one other component that really I love, that sucks you into the game and keeps my interest. Despite that, the game still held my interest throughout.
Yeah, and that's mostly because of the mechanics and the ease of learning and things like that. Yeah, agreed. Here at Board Game Corner, we rate on a scale of 1 to 4. We don't use stars, we use corners, because board games have corners, and the best games have all 4 corners.
That's right. And this week, we have our new rating scale in place. You'll see a new graphic here in a minute, but it covers all the things we just talked about. And so for me, I'm going to give this game a 3.5 out of 4 corners, right? So a couple of things right out of the gate that give it a little bit higher for me was the beautiful graphics. You know, I'm a big theme guy, so graphics are a big part of that. They pulled me in. And, of course, the rondelle. I really like that aspect, even though, like you said, I thought it was going to be gimmicky, but it really turned out to be a fun aspect of the game.
I rated it a little bit lower, and this is going to be blasphemous to some of those of you out there who wax nostalgic about this game and have been looking forward to a reprint forever. I would give it a 3. Now, that's not saying it's a bad game. It's actually a very good game, like I said. Is it a great game? I don't feel like it is. It's not a game where I say I really have to play this game. There are other games that take higher priority in my collection, but it's a very good game, and if you get a chance to buy it, I think you'll enjoy it if you buy it at a reasonable price. If you spend $100, you might be disappointed. Now, there's one caveat with our ratings today. These ratings are based upon our playing experiences with the game printed in 2007 by Rio Grande Games. There may be changes in the new game, such as perhaps different types of meeples or such. Please keep that in mind if you're considering buying one of the newer versions.
Also, I want to give a big thank you to Tom and the Dice Tower. Really appreciate you bringing us into the Dice Tower family and giving us this opportunity. We look forward to many more.
Absolutely. We also want to take this time to give a big shout out to our new friend from the Dice Tower, Rob Searing. If you have a need for quality game box inserts, please check out his site, Insert Here, at the link below.
And remember, we'll see you at the table.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.